Good afternoon. It's Thursday, March 14th, 2019. The time is now 1 p.m. and we are set to begin this broadcast of Special Topics in English Learner Programming. This is a monthly webinar series for you, and this month's webinar topic is Improving Skills in the 4 Language Domains. We will be focusing on the reading domain today. Thank you for joining me. I'll go back and do a little introduction. I am Anika Harris. I work here at OSSE as a professional development specialist, focusing on English language acquisition, grades K through 12. This is the third in a 4-part series, Improving Skills in the 4 Language Domains. The last 2 webinars were on listening and speaking. Today, we will talk about language acquisition, specifically the domain of reading, and consider how to design reading activities for both language and content development for English learners. We'll also look at strategies to improve reading comprehension. There's a lot to cover, so let's dive right in. As with the previous 2 webinars, I wanted to start with a case study. And the student we're following today is Sundari. She's a 12-year-old 6th grader, so she's in middle school. And Sundari came to the United States from India when she was 5 years old. She speaks English with her friends at school, but note that her family speaks mostly Hindi at home. She watches Indian channels online, and at home there's Sanskrit and English text for her to look at and read. Sundari qualifies for free and reduced lunch. Her most recent WIDA score, the level 4, that's the overall composite, and in reading she scored a 3.1. All of these details are going to matter when we look at the assignment she is faced with. But I wanted you to also know that her teachers have suspected that she has a disability for quite a while, because even though she can read fluently, she doesn't participate in activities that call for comprehension of the text. To be more specific, she'll ask to go to the bathroom. She'll say that she has stomach aches. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, she put her head down when her teacher asked her to solve the following PARC math sample. Here's that PARC math sample. There's text on the top, there's a graphic in the middle, more details under the graphic, and then there's an ask, and the ask is for her to make an estimation, explain how she came to that estimate, and then use the space provided to enter her estimate, do her work, and provide her explanation. Remember, yesterday, when Sundari was presented with this, she put her head down. What do you think might have caused Sundari's reaction to this text? So as with the other webinars on the different language domains, we're going to be using the question box or the chat feature, whichever you prefer, to respond to each other and have some interaction. The question now is, what about this text that you see on the screen, this PARC math sample, may have caused Sundari to put her head down? Go ahead and type in your responses. I'll be monitoring both the question and the chat box. Thank you for your participation. I know some of you are still typing in, but I think what I had in my mind are some of the same thoughts that you have in your mind. It's not just a numeric problem. This is a word problem, and the text can be a little bit confusing. For the person who responded that way, what is it about the text that's confusing? I'm wondering if you can expand on your response. The actual work that she's expected to do might seem too hard. So if it was just numbers, perhaps that she had to work with, that would be fine. But the fact that she has to work with numbers and words is a bit much, perhaps. Okay, so she's exposed to Sanskrit and English at home, but at school she has to rely solely on English. So yes, there may be some burden there. Here are some other considerations. We know that this problem is about yellow golf balls and white golf balls and companies selling yellow golf balls. Mentioned in there that Sundari is qualifies for free and reduced lunch. So we know that about her economic status here in the United States. We don't know what her family situation was in India. She may have been upper class, she may have been lower class, we're just not sure. What we might extend to her is that golf is not a sport that's played widely in India, as cricket is. So golf and golf balls may not mean that much to her. So this problem may not be that engaging for that reason. Also, this is a park sample. At this point in the year, her school is, like many of yours, likely preparing for the park assessment, and the pressure is on for her. She's taken park before, right? She's a 6th grader, and she may not want to disappoint herself or her family, so she may feel the pressure, yet this is a hard problem for her. But remember that this webinar is about reading. So we're thinking engagement. Do golf balls really mean that much to her? She might be focusing on golf balls and what golf balls are and why they're in this word problem rather than getting to the actual equation. When you look at the bullets, you start to see math words like increase in the first bullet, ratio of yellow balls to white balls, and in the third bullet, average. So these are some math words that you really need to be engaged in math and comfortable with math to understand. Increase and average may not have the same meaning in other content areas and in other contexts as they do in math. So that might be confusing. And in the second bullet, we do have the word ratio, but then there is this 1:5. You would really need to be, again, engaged in math to know that that is a ratio, and then what to do with that ratio. So those could be some reasons why this problem is problematic. Also, she's a 6th grader. If you remember back to when you were 11 or so, hormones start bubbling up, you need more sleep, and so there could be some physiological reasons why she's not engaged. Let's move forward. We will come back to Sundari and this math problem and see if we can resolve some issues for her. All right, so I wanted to give a primer on the 4 language domains that won't take too much time. As a review, the 4 language domains are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Here's WIDA's take on the 4 domains. They give you a definition for each here. Listening is a process where we understand and interpret. Where speaking is another process where we communicate orally. Reading is similar to listening in that you don't necessarily see it happening, but there's a lot of processing going on in the brain. Writing, like speaking, is something we can see students do. So it's a little more active and expressive. Oral language is comprised of the listening and speaking domains. It is known as the foundation of literacy, and literacy is comprised of the reading and writing domains. For English learners, school is usually where oral English skills develop, and reading comprehension or reading for meaning happens at school more for ELs in general. So to recap, listening and reading are receptive, right? You're using your ears and your eyes to receive information that goes to your brain and gets processed. Speaking and writing are expressive and are more easy to see in a student. Instead of receiving, you're taking information from the brain and putting it out. Whereas listening and reading are putting information into the brain. Speaking and writing are taking information from the brain and getting it out. Here in Washington, D.C., we are a member of the WIDA Consortium, and we use WIDA's English Language Proficiency Standards to help us understand what students can do with language and for planning and assessment purposes. The 5 standards are on the screen before you. For the case study, notice that standard 3 is the language of mathematics. And we do expect that English learners will be able to communicate information, ideas, and concepts to be successful in math, in addition to the other content areas. So our goal today is to figure out how we can help Sundari overcome her hump and not act out when she's faced with math problems to solve that are text heavy, like PARC problems are these days. Here are proficiency levels provided by WIDA. You can find these on WIDA's website, in the Access Test Accommodations Manual, and in their English Language Development Framework. But you notice that the levels go from 1 up to 6, with 1 being less proficient and 6 being the performance expected of a native English speaker. Sundari, on her annual English Language Proficiency Assessment, scored 4 overall. However, she got 3 in reading. Her teachers may have thought that because she was a level 4, that was her overall score, that she should be higher in reading, when in fact it's possible that students can have different levels of proficiency in the 4 language domains. So speaking can be at 1 score, listening can be at another, reading can be at 1 score, and writing can be at another. To summarize the previous slide, I have this graphic for you that shows the difference in performance of an English learner at levels 1, 3, and 5. The takeaway here is that while level 1 students do come with a lot, what they can produce in English may be more simple, and that is the nature of language acquisition. If you jump ahead to level 3, sort of that intermediate phase, they're not yet proficient. However, they're able to work with more text, more speech. They're able to listen to more, and they're able to write more, but there will be some errors. Level 5 is the level they need to reach to exit the English Learner Program here at BC. They're performing more or less on par with their native English-speaking peers, and they're able to work with more complex material. In the case of reading, they're able to respond to more complex text with fewer errors. And that complex text can include content-related and technical language, so more sophisticated. So I chose to do this 4-part series because communication is important, and we want English learners to increase in their English language proficiency, but each domain of communication has its own nuances that are significant for us to understand in English learners' development and for us to think about planning for their success and growth. Reading development, just like development in the other domains, happens in phases. This treatment of the stages of reading development is taken from Jean Shaw's Stages of Reading Development. And it is general to students, people who are learning to read, whether they're learning a new language or not. So it goes from recognizing a writing system, right, those pre-literacy, emergent skills, to be able to separate letters into something called words, and words into phrases. And at the intermediate level, a student begins to read with fluency and expression, although the meaning might still be a challenge. And at the advanced level, a reader is reading to learn. So comprehension is less of a challenge. It's important to infuse lessons with reading for English learners for the reasons bulleted here on the screen. Number one, it gives English learners exposure to vocabulary. Number two, and this is in no order of importance, but reading is great because English learners get to see the correct spelling of words that they will then use when they write. And the same goes with punctuation. English learners also appreciate the constructs or the rules of the English language. In other languages, the word order in a sentence may differ from the way word order appears in English. Grammar, like particles, may not be present in a student's home language, where particles are a very important part of the English language. And I want to draw attention to the last bullet, that reading allows students to review English over and over and over again. If you think about it, speaking happens instantaneously. Once those words are in the air and travel through the air, they're gone. And you can't get them back unless you have a good memory. With reading, the print is on the page forever until it's erased or until that text is taken away. So a student can look at spelling, look at punctuation usage, look at word order and grammar over and over and over again, and embed it into their mind for retrieval when they are ready to write, or for the next time they're reading. Reading will be less difficult because they've had this review of the English language. We want to know when a child is developing language well or when they may have a disability and need an evaluation. So understanding how children learn language, as you saw on the previous slide, helps us discern if a child is developing language well or may need an evaluation for a disability. Understanding how children learn a language and how children learn reading, in this case, helps us to create activities to help students progress in their English language acquisition. It helps us to develop assessments, to monitor their progress, and then make plans for further language growth. There's a quote here on the bottom by author James Britton: "Reading and writing float on a sea of talk." So all four language domains are interconnected. Listening and reading alone don't make fluency. Students need opportunities to speak and write. I can't stress enough how important it is to have multiple communication domains being exercised in a single lesson. Here are some challenges that are presented to an English learner. The environment, that column in the middle, is going to be present throughout. So in the listening and speaking webinars, we saw the same challenges. Reading is unique in that it has text that's already been produced that we're expecting a student to engage with. If the text is too dense or the quantity is too much, or if it's not that interesting, either because of the content or maybe it's got tiny font, or there are no pictures that go or illustrations that go along with it, or a student is reading and sees a word that has multiple meanings, as we saw in the PARC assessment example. Some of those math words like increase and average mean different things in different contexts. Those can present a challenge for the reader. The reader himself or herself may need more exposure to what you see in the last column, more vocabulary. They may need to have their background knowledge of the content built. They may benefit from scaffolds and from support in reading fluency, where comprehension is understanding the text and fluency is being able to read smoothly and nicely, in a nutshell. Speaking of supports, let's look at some supports for reading. You as educators can consider the following: that English learners can comprehend better when they can pronounce words on the page. So that means think about what words might be difficult, and perhaps you need to practice with students in advance if they're being asked to read those words. They may understand better if the text is assigned in smaller chunks. And I can appreciate this second bullet because as a lifelong language learner of different languages, there's no one language that, other than English, that I enjoy reading in large amounts. Reading takes a lot out of your nervous system, your neurological system. It's very taxing. So even with languages where I have greater fluency, unless I'm super engaged, I read a little bit and then I'm done. And I'm someone who does love to read, but that's just a product of brain fatigue, and English learners feel this as well. Students should not be rushed, and that's why we have an accommodation on the Part 2 of the Aussie Test Accommodations Manual for English learners. One of the accommodations is extended time. Reading material does need to be engaging. And that's true for all readers. But again, whereas I said I will tap out with a small amount of text in a foreign language despite being an avid reader, I do have many examples in my life where I had to read in another language for the purpose of learning something where I had intrinsic motivation. I was highly motivated for my own purposes. And in those cases, I would go to the library and consume volumes of reading material with no fatigue. So engagement is very important. Pre-teaching vocabulary, in addition to helping with pronunciation, helps to build background knowledge, and then building background knowledge of the content is also important for engagement. And teaching reading strategies is important for the same reason it's important for students who are not English learners. So there are a lot of great strategies to help develop reading skills, both for fluency and comprehension for English learners. We're going to be using Stella by Starlight, and you see the cover of this text by Sharon M. Draper on the slide, to go over the following strategies. As you see, preview the text, build background knowledge, build knowledge of register, engage other language domains, close reading, and scaffolding for comprehension. So before we look at the strategies, I actually want you to look at the cover of this book, Stella by Starlight. I've used this book in other PD for English language arts here at Aussie, but likely not with you, my current audience today. I want you to think about what you see, taking in the colors and the objects in the picture, and also contemplate the title of the book, Stella by Starlight. Try to put those all together. We're going to use that information to go through some of these reading strategies. One more moment to look here. And now, let's talk about previewing the text. Many of you either do or have seen picture walking or page walking, where you're simply going through in a very casual, informal manner. There's no assessment required. I'm looking at the pictures in a text, or looking at the headers, or a little bit of the words in each chapter of a book. And as you do so, you can ask students what they think the book will be about, or what the text will be about, just to get them talking, thinking, warmed up, engaged. And this is a time to let students point out tricky vocabulary or phrasing that they don't understand. To do so, you could have them circle or use a highlighter to highlight those words or terms, and then share out what they highlighted or what they circled. And you as a teacher write their responses so that you have a catalog of what is difficult for them, and you can plan to teach that before launching into a deeper dive of the text. Another strategy is build background knowledge. Pardon me while I go backwards here. And with building background knowledge, one thing that you could do to read a brief text that's related to the book or literature that you're working on in that lesson or unit. You can highlight the vocabulary in this related text that they'll likely see again in your target text, and work together on creating definitions, where perhaps they have a chance on their own to come up with definitions, and then they use other resources like dictionary or media or asking someone else outside of the classroom to help work on creating definitions for themselves. Visuals, graphics, and media are an excellent way to promote engagement and also build background knowledge. We'll look at some guiding questions that can help students engage with the material. But remember how I had you look at the cover of Stella by Starlight and contemplate the colors in the illustration and the title all together? Now look at the 3 pictures below. So I provided some visuals for you related to that text. And you'll see the first one has a picture of a man looking at a fence that says "Help Wanted, White Only." In the middle is a picture that says "Jim Crow Laws." And you see someone bending over to drink water from the colored water fountain, not from the white water fountain. And it also says "The Laws That Separated the South." That last picture is of the Paramount Theater, and it says explicitly "Colored Entrance." So as a teacher, I would ask you what the 3 pictures have in common. And then ask you what you thought of the cover of the book Stella by Starlight, and see if you can come up with any relationship between these 3 pictures and the cover. And then develop some questions around what Jim Crow was, what those laws in the South were, the time period, and how that influences the book, and get them excited about what they're going to read in Stella by Starlight. Register is a term used in the language world to define a certain, not necessarily sound as in sound waves, but words that are used together in a certain content. Plan time to guide students in understanding content-specific terms. So in fairy tales, you'll hear "once upon a time" and "the end." And also note that the characters tend to come in 3s. In science, theory, following procedures, form a hypothesis are phrases that show up frequently. And in math, I pulled out these 2, groups of like terms, and how many left? So these are terms that we tend to use just in those content areas, and the terms don't cross into other content areas that much. It's important to know that so that the students don't get caught up in the meaning of those terms, so much so that they can't focus on the rest of the text. Another benefit of helping students understand the register is so that they can write and speak with those terms on their own, with confidence. So I wanted to speak about vocabulary. Here are some considerations to have in mind when you determine which vocabulary to focus on: the frequency of the word, the availability of context clues, cognates, and then also thinking if the cognate, quote unquote, is a false cognate where it doesn't really mean the same. Can you imagine the word, or is it abstract? Is this a word unique to American culture? And those words do pop up in the book Stella by Starlight. You would have to know that time period in the American South, in the mountains of the American South, to understand the words. And if your students likely don't have that background, that's something that you can build before launching into the text. And is the morphology of the word important? And we're talking about separating the word into pieces. Does it have a prefix and a suffix? What other components of the word? Its tense, is it an adjective? And did those differences make the word have a new meaning or a different meaning than what is commonly known? So I mentioned engaging other language domains. And I also mentioned earlier in the webinar that the 4 language domains are interrelated. Here, with Stella by Starlight, in addition to exercising the listening domain, students could also enhance their engagement. So I pulled out a short piece of media for students to listen to, and we'll listen to it together. And then I have some guiding questions at the bottom. Now, when doing a listening example sample like this with English learners or with any learner, and you're going to have guiding questions, why not preview the questions with the students together and let them know that if they listen carefully, they will be able to answer the questions through what they hear. So in our case, we have 4 questions in the blue box below. When the author's grandmother was 10 years old, what happened? You'll find the answer in the media clip that I will preview for you. Why did her grandmother have to quit school? What did her grandmother do by the light of the moon? What kind of community do you think Bumblebee, North Carolina might be? The answers are contained within the following clip. Let's listen to it together.
When my grandmother passed away, she gave something to my father that was very, very special to her. When she was 10 years old, she was made to quit school because she was a girl and she had enough education, but she was a learner. She wanted to learn. She wanted to do more. She would go outside at night after everyone had gone to sleep, and she would write in this journal by the light of the moon, which was the only free time that she had. So when she passed away, she gave the one remaining journal to my father. He gave it to me, and he said, I want you to write my mother's story. It took me all my life for those stories to become a part of me and finally emerge so that I could retell them. If you live in a very small African-American community in 1912, 1922, 1932, 1942, it was about the same. The difficulties were the same, and the community closeness was the same. So Stella's story, even though it takes place a long time ago, is still happening today. And I think from books of historical fiction, we can learn something that can help us in the present.
All right, so even though that clip was just 1 minute and 40 seconds, I would encourage you to consider not only playing the clip, but going back to the 4 guiding questions and then seeing what students were able to understand and answer, and going back to the clip again to let students listen again. As I've typed here, allow for multiple opportunities to listen. It's a short amount for us, but there's a lot of words for an English learner, and so they should have multiple opportunities to hear that media clip to be able to answer the questions successfully. You might also notice that I used words that come directly from the media clip. So there are no trick questions here. The students have to listen carefully, but they'll be listening for direct language that they see here in the questions, and that's called creating text-dependent questions, or in our case with this media clip, sound-dependent questions that are not too tricky, but still ask students to exercise their brains. All right, let's look at another strategy. Continuing with engaging other language domains, I wanted to show how speaking and writing can be exercised in getting to know the book, a piece of text for reading, Stella by Starlight. And with the speaking domain, I've mentioned that it's okay for students to grapple with the text productively. You could assign chunks of text and then have students discuss the meaning in small groups. The task group could be to make an oral presentation, the summary of their small chunk of text, to reenact the text or act it out in a dramatic fashion, come up with a meaning of the text that they agree upon, and then illustrate it. And that sounds like a pretty fun activity to me. For writing, students could also be assigned smaller chunks of text and then produce scaffolded written responses. And the scaffolds are in the blue box below, right there, sentence frames with some language provided for the student, and then they have to fill in the blanks based on what they know. The second sentence frame there has words for them to choose from under the line, and then they write the words into onto the line. As an extension, the students could complete these two frames, or one or the other, and then rewrite them with all of the words filled in, so that they really are exercising their writing skills, practicing with word order, with punctuation, but the support is already provided there for them. And this isn't making anything easier for an English learner. For a student who's at a level where they would need this support, not having the support would make or break the student. But having the support does mean that they are engaging in a productive struggle. They're making meaning of not only the content, but also the written language. With close reading, if you're not familiar with it, it's a technique that happens in 3 stages. Students read text the first time, and you just want to know what they got out of it. There's no assessment. They're not being assigned points or penalized in any way. Just want to know what they got out of it. Then they're allowed to read that same text a second time, and they need to be thinking about the organization of the text and some features that the author has included to add meaning. Then the student is allowed to read the text a third time, right? They get an even closer reading where they're expected to maybe tease out the symbolism or determine what the author's point of view is, or figure out if they have a text-to-self connection, right? There's something that they can relate to, or something in the text that relates back to their life. So just like with listening, where I mentioned in that media clip, it's important for English learners to have multiple opportunities to hear that clip. With reading, it's really great if they can have multiple opportunities to read the same text or the same chunk of text, getting a little bit closer in comprehension with each pass. Scaffolding is a strategy that, again, is providing support in both language development and content. For a student who's at level 1, you can see that the sentence frame has a lot of words and is expecting the student to produce fewer words, but that's appropriate for a student at that level. They could also be supplied with a word bank that has pictures accompanying the words, and that word bank can contain the words that they will then fill in the blanks of the sentence frame. A student who's at an intermediate level of proficiency or a level 3 could also get a word bank, but maybe they don't need the visual support anymore. And they could be supplied with a sentence starter, as you see in the sample below. There is less support in this sentence starter than there is in the sentence frame above. And that's because student at level 3 needs less support. A student at level 5 who's functioning on par with their native English-speaking peers might just need the same questions that their peers are getting. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up parent and family considerations. It's great to encourage parents to model reading at home, even if their own literacy skills are low. This can look different ways. One thing that parents could do is read an age-appropriate text to their child or with their child. Parents could also just look at a text that has pictures, and if they're not literate, focus on the pictures and talk about what they see with their child. Students can benefit from seeing teachers, friends, grown-ups, and their parents read for themselves in front of their child. This stresses the importance of reading in our world, that many people do read, and that we have to read for information, whether it's reading signage on a street to help us get where we're going safely, or reading a menu at a restaurant to be able to order a dish that's appealing to us, reading to help plan a vacation. There are so many areas of our day-to-day lives where we do read, and so it's great for children to see their parents do so. Parents could point out to their child where they see writing and what it means. And don't think that this is just for small children like pre-K3 or pre-K4. I did teach high school to newcomers, and they would have benefited from parents and teachers modeling reading, just as you see in these examples. So going back to our case study, Sundari, the 6th grader, remember? She would be asked to read, and then she would be uncomfortable. We know that yesterday she put her head down when she was asked to look at this math problem and solve it. But she also has a pattern of saying she doesn't feel well or asking to go to the bathroom where reading is involved. So we thought a little bit about what could be causing Sundari to act in that particular way. Maybe she does have a learning disability or some other sort of disability that has not yet been identified, but perhaps there are other factors. And some of those factors could be she needs to build background knowledge have her vocabulary developed, and so on and so forth, strategies that we just went over could help her to struggle less with word problems. So I picked PARC because we know that this statewide assessment is text heavy and does require a lot of reading and writing. Now that you've seen some strategies, I want to throw this back at you. You can use the question or chat box to answer the following. What could Sundari's teacher do in advance of PARC, which is a couple of months away, to prepare her to solve this math problem? Let's go ahead and see your ideas. Go ahead and type in the question or chat box. I'll be monitoring. All right, keep the ideas coming as I read a little bit of what I'm seeing. One is the teacher could do some pre-work with the register. So taking that phrasing or those words that are specific to math word problems and making a lesson or a portion of a lesson on register to get Sundari and her classmates more comfortable with that register so they're not tripped up by it when they get to PARC. And that's a great idea. So again, those words like increase, ratio, average, estimate, explain how you determined. Right, there are other ways to say those. So if we could translate those into plain English and make that a portion of a lesson or a whole lesson, that might benefit Sundari and her classmates. Another idea coming through is to build background knowledge. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of hard to build background knowledge on PARC, but there's no reason why in this preparatory lesson the teacher couldn't take a little bit of time knowing that there are students who may not be familiar with golf to explain what golf is, what golf balls look like. All right, and then some basic strategies, for example, understanding how to decode word problems, right? That would take some joint planning, I think, between a reading and math specialist. So this is another good idea that didn't come up earlier in the webinar, but teaching students how to draw out or illustrate what the problem is describing. Like the box of 12 yellow or 12 white golf balls in the third bullet. And also, that's a good point, the math teacher could help students think about how word problems are written and what text is necessary to understand. And so you pay attention to that and what text is really extra. I know we're not taking the LSAT here, but that's a test-taking trick that will follow students all the way up through postgraduate school, right? Which words are there that you need to make meaning of and which ones are there to just trick you. All right, so good luck to Sundari and her classmates in PARC this year. I wanted to share some additional resources with you. All of these resources are the same and maintain their value. We have created a publication called Delivering Education Services to English Learners. It's our policies and procedures document. those of you who are on the webinar today will get an email with this PowerPoint that has live links to the document. So you just click on the blue text and you can see the publication. You'll also find within that publication at the end is Appendix E. We have a school readiness reflection tool. So if you're an administrator or an English learner coordinator concerned with the design of your EL program, we have a tool now available to you to think about where you stand. Is your program well-rounded and balanced, or is there some work for you to do? You can use that tool as a worksheet of sorts. We have a new website dedicated to English learner issues, and that is the third statement on this slide. If you click on it, you'll see archived recordings of the webinars. I'm not able to email webinar links anymore because we have a new platform. But if you go to the website, you can find this webinar will be placed there as well as previous broadcasts. And if you'd like to reach out to our team, we'd love to hear from you. I'm Anika Harris, and my email appears below, along with Dr. Jennifer Norton's email. She is the new EL manager here at Aussie. Wanted to let you know that the last in this four-part series on writing will take place in a month on April 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. Again, the same link that you used to sign up for this webinar is valid to sign up for the next one. And here are some save the dates. As you see, we will host the first ever Aussie Multilingual Learner Conference on Friday, June 7th and Saturday, June 8th. Friday, June 7th, these sessions will focus on English learners and English language programs. And this Saturday will focus on dual language programs and topics that are specific to dual language programs. We hope you join us and look out for the registration link. I also wanted to mention this week or next week we will be opening registration for two events. One, with great anticipation, we're welcoming back Dr. Brenda Custodio, who is a well-known author on supporting students with limited and or interrupted formal education. She will be here on Friday, April 12th, all day. Look out for the registration link for that. It's going to be a popular session. And we are bringing WIDA back for a two-day session on Scaffolding Up. That will happen on Tuesday and Wednesday, April 23rd and 24th here at Aussie. So again, those registration links will be available, if not tomorrow, then next week. If you'd like to reach out to us here at Aussie, our contact information appears. Again, we'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to broadcasting to you next month. Have a great afternoon.